The valley had a name in no human language, only a low hum the wind made as it crossed the broken rocks. Nothing had landed here in a long time. Then the sky tore open with fire and noise, and the supply ship Cinderdrift came down like a thrown stone, skidding across stone and dirt before it stopped in a cloud of smoke and dust. Inside, 4 people groaned and pulled themselves up from the floor. The lights flickered red. Alarms wailed and then died as the power dipped. "Everyone alive," Bray called out. He was the oldest of them, a wide man with gray in his beard and burned scars on both arms from years of cooking in ship galleys. He had been thrown against the wall, but he was already on his feet, checking the others. "Alive," said Pell, the engineer, rubbing her head. She was thin and quick, always watching, always thinking. "Barely. The drive core is dead. We came in way too hard." Captain Halen pushed herself out of her chair and looked at the cracked window. "Where are we?" "Wrong place," Pell said. "That's the only answer I have. The routing computer sent us off the map. This world wasn't even supposed to have a name." The 4th crew member, a young deckhand named Tomas, pointed at the window with a shaking hand. "Captain, there's something moving out there." They crowded close to the glass. Outside, in the gray morning light, the broken ground was alive with motion. Shapes were coming out of the rocks and the dry brush. At first Bray thought they were animals, low and fast, the size of big dogs. Then he saw the wings folded against their backs, the long necks, the scales that caught the dim light. Dozens of them. And from the open mouths came a soft glow, a heat building deep in their throats. "Dragons," Tomas whispered. "Those are dragons." "They're bobbies," Pell said quietly. "Look at the size, hatchlings, but there are so many of them." The hatchlings were not curious. They were angry. Every one of them faced the ship, heads low, throats glowing brighter and brighter. A thin line of smoke rose from the nearest one's nose. They moved together, spreading out, the way a pack moves before it strikes. "They think we're a threat," Halen said. "Pell, can we get any weapons online? Shields, anything?" "Power's gone, Captain. We've got nothing. The doors won't even seal right." Pell's voice was tight. "If they decide to burn us, we sit here and cook." The word made Bray turn his head. Cook. He had been only half listening. His hands were already moving, the way they did when he was nervous, the way they had moved for 30 years. When a ship was in trouble, when people were scared, when everything was falling apart, Bray cooked. It was the only thing that ever made the fear sit still in his chest. And the Cinderdrift carried an old external smoker bolted to the cargo ramp, a battered metal box he had built himself for long hauls. "Bray, what are you doing?" Halen said. He had already pulled the lever to lower the cargo ramp a crack, just enough. "I'm thinking," he said. "I always think better with my hands busy. There are flying lizards out there about to burn us alive." "I heard you." Bray reached into the cold store beside the smoker and pulled out the last of their preserved meat, thick slabs they had been saving for the long trip home. He didn't really decide to do it. His hands decided. He fed the smoker a little of the ship's emergency fuel, struck a spark, and the old box caught with a soft whump. He laid the meat across the rack and closed the lid. "You're cooking," Halen said, staring at him. "We are about to die and you are cooking." "If I'm going to go," Bray said, "I'd rather smell something good while it happens." Outside, the hatchlings charged. It happened fast. The whole pack surged forward at once, claws on stone, wings flaring, throats blazing with light. Tomas shouted. Pell grabbed the captain's arm. Bray stood by his smoker and braced for the heat that would end them all. Then the smell hit the valley. The smoker had warmed enough to send the first thin ribbon of scent into the morning air, the deep, rich, fatty smell of meat cooking slow over flame. It rolled out across the rocks, carried by the wind, and it reached the charging hatchlings before their fire could reach the ship. And they stopped. Every single one of them froze. The glow in their throats faded. The smoke from their noses thinned and died. They stood frozen on the broken ground, heads lifting, nostrils flaring, eyes going wide and confused. The anger drained out of them all at once. The pack that had been a heartbeat from burning the ship now stood still, sniffing the air like a crowd of hungry children who had just smelled their first real meal. Inside, no one breathed. "What," Pell said slowly, "is happening?" Bray looked at the frozen dragons. Then he looked at his smoker. A slow, careful understanding came over his old, scarred face. "They're hungry," he said softly. "Look at them, skin and bone under those scales. They didn't come to kill us because they hate us." He opened the smoker lid and let the smell pour out thick and full into the valley. "They came because they're starving, and they've never smelled anything like this in their lives." The hatchlings took one shaky step closer, then another. And Bray, against every order, against all sense, took a slab of meat in his bare hands and started walking down the ramp toward them. "Bray," Halen's voice cracked through the cargo bay, "get back here right now." He did not get back. He kept walking, slow and steady, down the ramp and onto the broken ground of the valley. The morning air was cold against his face. In his hands he held a slab of cooked meat, still warm, still steaming, and the smell of it went ahead of him like a flag of truce. The hatchlings watched him come. They were spread across the rocks in a loose half-circle, dozens of them, each one tense and ready. A grown man walking toward a pack of fire-breathing predators with his bare hands out should have been the end of him. He knew that. His heart was banging against his ribs. But 30 years of feeding scared people had taught him one thing. You do not run from a hungry creature. You feed it. He stopped well short of them. He found a flat rock, the kind he might use for a serving table on a quiet night, and he set the meat down on it. Then he stepped back, slow, his empty hands held open where they could see. "Go on," he said quietly. His voice was rough and gentle. "It's for you, go on then." Nothing moved for a long moment. The wind hummed across the rocks. Then one hatchling broke from the pack. It was a little bigger than the others, with a long scar running down one side of its neck where something had clawed it badly and it had healed crooked. It crept forward low to the ground, eyes locked on Bray, then on the meat, then on Bray again. "Smoke," Bray thought, watching the dark scales and the curl of breath from its nose. "I'll call you Smoke." Smoke reached the rock. It sniffed the meat, careful, suspicious. Then it took a bite. The change was instant. The hatchling's eyes went wide, then half closed. It made a sound low in its throat that was not a growl at all, a kind of rumbling purr, and it tore into the meat with sudden hunger. Behind it, the rest of the pack felt the shift like a wave. The tension broke. They came forward all at once, not charging now, but crowding, pushing, a flock of starving young animals desperate for the strange, wonderful thing one of their own had found. Bray backed away to give them room. He need not have worried about being trampled. They had no eyes for him at all anymore. They had eyes only for the food. On the ramp, the rest of the crew stood frozen with their mouths open. "He fed them," Tomas said. "He just walked out there and fed them." Pell let out a breath she had been holding for what felt like an hour. "It worked," she said. "It actually worked. Captain, did you see their throats? The fire went out the second they smelled it. The glow only comes when they're scared or angry. Calm them down and the fire just stops." Halen lowered the wrench she had grabbed as a weapon she could never have used. "So their fire isn't a tool," she said slowly. "It's a feeling." "Exactly that," Pell said. "It's not like a gun they aim. It's tied to their mood. Fear makes fire. Anger makes fire." She watched the hatchlings purr and feed and tumble over one another on the rocks. "And whatever this is, this stops it cold." Bray came back up the ramp, his empty hands shaking a little now that it was over. He sat down hard on a crate and let out a long breath. "You're insane," Halen told him. "You know that, completely insane." "Maybe," he said, "but we're not on fire." She could not argue with that. For the next while they simply watched. The hatchlings finished the meat down to nothing, then licked the rock clean, then settled in groups on the warm stones near the ship. They were not afraid anymore. Some of them slept. Some of them played, batting at each other with their wings. Smoke, the scarred one, did not sleep. It sat a little apart from the others, near the bottom of the ramp, and it watched the ship with bright, careful eyes. Now and then it looked straight at Bray. "That one's smart," Pell said. "Smarter than the rest. See how it watches us. It's figuring us out." Bray nodded. He pulled another smaller piece of meat from the smoker, walked halfway down the ramp, and set it on the lowest step. Then he sat down on the ramp and waited. Smoke studied the meat. It studied Bray. Then it climbed the bottom step, took the food, and instead of running off with it, sat down right there, an arm's length away, and ate. When it finished, it did not leave. It looked at him with those bright eyes and made the soft, rumbling sound deep in its chest. "Well," Bray said softly, "hello there." He did not reach out to touch it. He was old enough to know better than to push. He just sat with it, the two of them on the ramp in the gray morning, a tired human and a scarred little dragon sharing the quiet. Inside the ship, Halen finally let herself believe they might live through this. "Pell," she said, "how long to fix the drive core?" Pell thought about it. "Days, maybe more. I'll need to scavenge parts, and I can't do it scared half to death every minute." Halen looked out at the sleeping flock, at Bray and Smoke on the ramp. "Then we'd better hope the cook keeps cooking," she said, "because for now that smoker is the only thing keeping us alive." She did not know yet how true that would become. None of them did. They thought the danger had passed. But the hatchlings had a mother, and she was still out hunting in the hills, and she did not yet know what had landed among her young. She came over the ridge a little after dawn, and the whole valley felt her before they saw her. The sleeping hatchlings woke as one and lifted their heads toward the hills. The wind changed. A shadow slid across the rocks. Then she crested the ridge and stood there against the pale sky, and Bray's mouth went dry. The matriarch was huge. Where the hatchlings were the size of dogs, she was the size of the ship. Her scales were dark and worn, scarred from a lifetime of hard hunting. Her wings, half spread, threw a shadow over half the valley. She carried something limp in her jaws, a small dead animal, thin and bony, and the sight of it told Bray more than any words could. She had hunted all night, this great creature, and that scrap was all she had to bring home to feed dozens of mouths. Then she saw the ship, and the humans, and her young, sleeping and full, scattered around an alien thing that had no business being there. She dropped the dead animal. Smoke began to curl from her jaws. "Get inside," Halen said. "Everyone now." "No," Bray said. "Bray, that thing could swallow the smoker whole." "And if we run inside and hide, what does she see?" Bray kept his eyes on the matriarch. "She sees an enemy that snuck up on her bobbies in the dark. We hide, we're a threat. We stand still, we're a question." He swallowed hard. "Let me answer the question." The matriarch came down the ridge slow, not charging the way the hatchlings had. She was old and she was clever, and she did not waste fire on things she did not understand yet. She moved toward the ship one heavy step at a time, head low, eyes moving over everything, smoke trailing from her nose. She was deciding. The whole valley waited on her decision. And then the strangest thing happened. The hatchlings did not scatter from the humans toward their mother. They stayed. Some of them gathered closer to the ship, closer to Bray, the way full and happy children gather near the one who fed them. And Smoke, the scarred one, picked up a leftover scrap of cooked meat in its mouth, trotted out across the rocks, and dropped it in front of the matriarch's enormous clawed feet. The great dragon stopped. She looked down at the small cooked thing. She looked at her scarred child, fat and content where it should have been starving. She lowered her head and sniffed the meat, and her eyes, which had been hard and hot, flickered with confusion. Bray understood then what he had to do. He turned to the smoker. "Pell, help me, everything we've got, the biggest piece. Make it the best thing that's ever come out of this box. Bray, that's the last of our food." "Then it had better count." They worked fast. Bray took the largest slab of meat left in the cold store, rubbed it with the last of his spices, and laid it over the flame. He cooked it the way he had learned over 30 years, slow and patient, turning it, feeding the smoke, until the smell that rose from the box was the richest the valley had ever known. The matriarch's head came up. Her nostrils flared. The smoke from her jaws thinned. When it was ready, Bray took the meat in both hands. It was heavy and hot, and it burned his palms through the cloth, and he did not care. He walked down the ramp alone, past the hatchlings, out across the open rocks toward a creature that could kill him without effort. "Bray," Halen said behind him, soft now, "you don't have to do this." "Somebody does," he said. "Might as well be the cook." He walked until he stood before her. She towered over him, vast and ancient, smoke curling from her jaws, close enough that he could feel the heat of her breath. One snap and he was gone. He knew it. His hands shook. But he knelt down, slow and careful, and he set the great slab of meat on the ground between them. Then he sat back on his heels, empty hands open, and he looked up into those enormous eyes. "I know you're tired," he said quietly, his voice rough. "I know you've been hunting all night and all you found was that little scrap. I know you've got too many mouths and not enough to feed them." He nodded at the meat. "I can help with that, if you let me. That's all I do. I feed people. Let me feed yours." She could not understand his words, but she understood the meat, and she understood the open hands, and she understood that her children were full for the first time in a long time and were not afraid. The matriarch lowered her great head. The smoke died in her throat completely. She sniffed the offering, long and deep. And then, while the whole valley held its breath and the crew stood frozen on the ramp and Smoke watched with bright, hopeful eyes, the ancient dragon opened her jaws and ate what the human had cooked for her. When she finished, she did not strike. She lifted her head and looked at Bray for a long, long moment, something working behind those old eyes. Then she made a sound, deep and low, a rumble he felt in his chest more than heard. Smoke ran to her side and rumbled back. Bray let out a breath that seemed to take a year with it. Slowly, on shaking legs, he stood. The matriarch watched him do it. She did not stop him. He backed away, step by step, and she let him go, and when he reached the ramp, Halen grabbed his arm and held it hard. "You're the bravest fool I've ever served with," she said. "I'm just the cook," Bray said, but he was smiling. Trust did not come all at once. It came the way Bray cooked, slow and patient, a little more each day. The matriarch did not leave the valley after that morning. She stayed near the ship, watching, always watching, but she no longer smoked at the sight of the humans. She let them move about. She let Bray work his smoker. And every evening when the food was ready, she came and ate what he set out, and the hatchlings ate beside her, and slowly the strangeness of it all wore smooth. It was Pell who pieced together the truth of the place. While the others slept, she stayed up studying the dragons, watching how they lived, and what she found made her quiet. "This world is dying," she told them on the third day. "The prey is almost gone. I've watched the matriarch hunt. She's out all night and she comes back with almost nothing. These hatchlings aren't a normal clutch. I think they're the last big one this valley will ever have, and half of them should already be dead from hunger." She looked out at the flock. "That's why they attacked us. It wasn't hate. A starving thing attacks anything that lands in its territory, because anything might be food, or might be a rival for the little food that's left." Bray turned the meat on the rack and said nothing for a while. "They eat their kills raw," he said at last. "Tough, stringy, half of it they can't even chew." He nodded at the smoker. "But fire and smoke and time, that turns the worst meat soft, turns the parts they'd throw away into something a body can live on. They've had fire their whole lives, right there in their own throats, but they've never once thought to cook with it." "Why would they?" Pell said. "Fire was only ever a weapon to them, a feeling, fear and anger. Nobody ever showed them it could be anything else. So Bray showed them. He did it the only way he could, by doing it where they could see. He took the toughest, stringiest, most useless scraps of the matriarch's poor kills, the parts she left because no jaw could manage them, and he cooked them down slow over the smoker until they fell apart soft and rich. Then he set them out. The hatchlings, who had turned their noses up at those same raw scraps, ate them eagerly once they were cooked. The matriarch watched all of this. She was old and she was clever, and Bray could see her working it out behind her eyes. The useless parts, the fire, the soft good food that came out the other side. On the fifth day, she did something that made Bray put down his tools and stare. She had made a small kill in the night, a thin animal, and she dragged it near the ship. But she did not eat it raw. She laid it down on the rocks near the smoker, looked at Bray, and then breathed a low, careful flame across it, not the burst of an angry dragon but a slow, controlled heat, watching the meat the whole time the way she had watched him work. She was trying to cook. She did it badly. She charred one side black and left the other raw, and she looked frustrated and confused by the result. But she had tried. A wild creature that had used fire only to fight had watched a human and tried to use it to feed her young instead. "Pell," Bray said softly, "are you seeing this?" "I'm seeing it," Pell whispered. "She's learning, she's actually learning from us." Bray walked over slow, the way he always did, hands open. He knelt by the badly cooked kill. The matriarch tensed, then held still. Carefully showing her each move, Bray took the meat, set it on his rack and cooked it properly, low and even, turning it the way it needed turning. When it was done, he cut it and set it before her so she could see the difference between her work and his. She ate it. Then she looked at him with those ancient eyes, and Bray would have sworn there was something almost like thanks in them. Meanwhile, the work on the ship went on. Pell scavenged what parts she could and pieced the drive core back together a little at a time, and to her surprise, she was never alone while she did it. The hatchlings followed her everywhere, fascinated by the tools and the sparks and the strange humans. Smoke in particular shadowed her constantly, poking its scarred nose into every open panel until she had to gently push it away. Tomas, who had been terrified at the start, ended up with 3 hatchlings sleeping in a pile against his back at night, and he stopped being afraid somewhere along the way without noticing it happen. "We could leave soon," Pell told the captain one evening. "Another day or 2 on the core and she'll fly." Halen watched Bray sitting by the smoker with smoke curled against his leg, and the matriarch resting nearby, the whole valley quiet and warm in the dusk. "And then what?" Halen said. "We leave them here on a dying world to starve again the moment we're gone." Pell didn't have an answer for that. But the question never got the chance to be settled the easy way. Because that same night, far up in the dark sky above the valley, a new light appeared. It was not a star. It moved. It grew larger and brighter, falling toward them, and it carried the hard, clean shape of a ship. The Cinder Drift's distress beacon had been calling out into the dark since the day they crashed, and something had finally answered, but not all answers come to help. The ship that came down in the night was not like the Cinder Drift. It was lean and armored and ugly, built for taking rather than carrying, and it landed at the far end of the valley with a heavy thump that woke every creature in it. Pell read the markings through the scope and her face went hard. "Raiders," she said. "Scrappers. They follow distress beacons out to the edge of nowhere, then they strip the wreck and take whatever the world is worth. Sometimes the crew too, if there's a price on them." "They came for us," Halen said. "They came for the ship," Pell said. "We're just extra." The raiders did not waste time on hellos. By first light, a group of them came across the valley on foot, armed, moving with the easy boredom of people who had done this many times. Their leader was a tall woman with a scarred jaw and a heavy weapon slung over her shoulder, and she looked at the Cinder Drift the way a butcher looks at a carcass. Then the hatchlings came out of the rocks, drawn by the strangers, and the raider leader's bored face turned to disgust. "Vermin," she said. "Whole valleys crawling with them. Burn them off, they're not worth the trouble." "No," Bray said, stepping forward. "Leave them be, they're not bothering you." The raider looked at the old cook and laughed. "Hooray you, grandfather, the pet keeper." She raised her weapon, not at Bray, but at the nearest hatchling, a small one that had wandered too close out of pure curiosity. She fired. The shot caught the little hatchling and it went down with a cry that cut straight through the morning, a thin, broken sound. and the whole valley went still. Bray felt the change before he saw it. The air seemed to tighten. The hatchlings, who had been calm and full for days, who had not made fire since the morning they charged the ship, lifted their heads as one. And in dozens of small throats the glow came back, not the wild, scared glow of starving bobbies, something colder. Their friend was hurt. Their friend was crying, and the thing that had hurt it stood right there. Fear makes fire. Anger makes fire. And now, for the first time, the dragons of the valley had a real enemy to be angry at. Captain Pell breathed, their throats. The matriarch came over the ridge like a storm. She had heard the cry of her wounded young, and the slow, careful, learning creature of the last few days was gone. What came down the slope now was the full fury of a mother dragon, wings wide, jaws blazing, a roar coming out of her that shook stones loose from the rocks. The raider leader's bored face finally changed. "What is that?" she said. "What is that thing?" "That," Bray said, "is the part you should have left alone." He did not wait to see what happened next. He ran to the fallen hatchling and gathered it up, the small body shaking against his chest, and he carried it back toward the ship while the valley erupted behind him. The raiders opened fire, but they were not ready for what they faced. They had come to clear vermin and instead found a coordinated fury. The matriarch swept down on them with fire that was nothing like the burst of a frightened hatchling, a long, aimed, terrible flame. The hatchlings came in fast and low from every side, dozens of them, darting and biting and burning, a swarm that gave the gunners nothing to aim at. And the humans did not stand aside. "Pell the cargo loader, the cutting torch, anything that throws heat or force," Halen shouted. "Tomas with me. Bray, get that little one inside and stay down." But Bray did not stay down. He set the wounded hatchling gently in Tomas's arms, and then he did the only thing he truly knew how to do, the thing that had started all of this. He turned to his smoker. He cranked the old fuel feed wide open, far past safe, until the flame inside roared and the metal began to glow, and then he and Pell wrestled the whole burning box to the edge of the ramp and aimed it like a cannon. When the raider leader charged the ship at the head of her crew, Bray let it go. The smoker tumbled down the ramp trailing fire and scattered burning fuel and white-hot coals across the rocks in front of them, and the charge broke apart in the smoke and the heat. That was all the opening the dragons needed. The matriarch landed between the raiders and their ship, vast and burning, and she roared, and the message in it needed no translation in any language anywhere. "Leave." The raiders looked at their scattered line, at the swarm of furious hatchlings, at the great dragon and the strange humans fighting side by side, and they decided this dead world was not worth dying for. They ran. They scrambled back across the valley to their ugly armored ship, and it lifted off hard and fast and fled into the sky, smaller and smaller, until it was gone. The valley fell quiet. Smoke drifted across the rocks. Bray's smoker lay ruined and cooling at the bottom of the ramp, its job done. And in Tomas's arms, the little hurt hatchling stirred, and made a small soft sound and lived. The matriarch came to them slowly, her fire gone now, her great chest heaving. She looked at the wounded child in the human's arms. She looked at the ruined smoker. She looked at Bray, this old creature who had run into the open to carry her young to safety. And she lowered her enormous head until it nearly touched the ground before him and held it there. Bray, with tears in his old eyes that he would later blame on the smoke, reached out and gently laid his hand on her scarred jaw. The wounded hatchling healed slowly over the days that followed. Tomas barely left its side, feeding it soft cooked scraps by hand until it could eat on its own again. And when it finally stood and stretched its small wings, the whole crew cheered like it was one of their own. By then the drive core was done. Pell ran the final checks and stepped back from the panel with grease on her face and something heavy in her eyes. "She'll fly," she said. "Whenever we want, we can leave." The words sat in the cargo bay, and nobody rushed to fill the silence. Bray was outside, as he almost always was now, sitting on the rocks with Smoke curled against his leg and the matriarch resting nearby in the afternoon sun. He had rebuilt the smoker from the wreck of the old one, smaller and rougher, but it worked, and the smell of cooking drifted over a valley that no longer charged at the scent of strangers. Halen came out and sat down beside him. For a while she said nothing, just looked at the dragons, at the healed hatchling tumbling with the others, at the great matriarch dozing in the light. "Drive's fixed," she said finally. "We can go home." Bray nodded slowly. He scratched Smoke under the jaw, and the scarred little dragon rumbled and pushed into his hand. "And what happens here when we do?" he asked. "The raiders are gone, but the world's still dying. The prey's still almost gone. We fly off, and in a season or two they're right back where we found them, starving, attacking the next thing that lands until something finally kills them for it." He looked at the matriarch. "She learned to cook, Captain. She watched me and she learned. But you can't smoke meat that isn't there. They need food, real supply, more than this rock can give." Halen already knew where he was going. She had known for days. "You want to come back," she said. "I want to do more than come back." Bray turned to face her, and there was a steady fire in the old cook's eyes she had not seen before. "We run supply, Captain. That's the whole job. We haul food and goods across the dark for people who can't get it themselves. Well," he spread his scarred hands toward the valley, "here's people who can't get it themselves. We set up a run. We bring food stores. We teach them to stretch it, to cook it, to last. We put this valley on a route." He smiled. "First trade deal in history sealed with BBQ. Think the company will go for it?" Halen laughed, and it surprised her how easy it was. "The company will think we've lost our minds." She looked at the dragons a long moment. "But there's salvage value in a first contact. There's value in a friendly port on the edge of nowhere. I can make them see it." She shook her head. "And if I can't, we'll do it anyway." So they made ready to leave, but not to leave for good. The whole valley came out to watch the cinder drift go. The hatchlings lined the rocks, dozens of them, healthy and full and unafraid, the small healed one among them. The matriarch stood on the ridge where she had first appeared with Smoke in her jaws, but there was no Smoke now, only the warm light of the setting sun on her old scarred scales. Bray was the last up the ramp. Smoke followed him to the bottom of it and stopped, and would not come further, and Bray knelt down in front of the scarred little dragon that had been the first to trust him. "I'm coming back," he said softly. "You hear me? This isn't goodbye. I've got a route to run and a valley to feed, and I'm not about to drop my best customers." He pressed his forehead gently against the hatchling's hard brow. "Look after them till I'm back." Smoke rumbled low in its chest, and pushed its head into his hands one last time. The ramp closed. The drive core, fixed at last, hummed to life. The cinder drift lifted off the broken ground where it had crashed weeks ago as a dying ship full of frightened people, and it rose now light and whole into the evening sky. Through the window they watched the valley shrink below them. They saw the matriarch spread her great wings and rise off the ridge to follow them up as far as she could go, the way a host walks a guest to the gate. They saw the hatchlings racing along the rocks beneath her. And then the world was a curve, and then a ball, and then a small bright thing against the stars, and it was gone. The bridge was quiet. "You know," Pell said, "when we crashed I figured that was the end of us. Empty rock at the edge of the map, wrong place, nobody coming." "It was the wrong place," Halen said. "The routing computer made a mistake." Bray was already heading aft, toward the little rebuilt smoker, his hands itching the way they always did. "Best mistake that computer ever made," he said over his shoulder. He fired up the smoker one more time, there in the warm belly of the ship climbing home, because some bonds are best kept warm, and because a route this good deserved a meal to market. The smell drifted up through the corridors, rich and familiar, and the crew drifted toward it the way they always did, the way the hatchlings had on that first terrible morning. The galaxy had always expected humans to come bringing weapons. Out here on the dying edge of the map, they had come bringing dinner instead. And that in the end had changed everything.